Hi, everyone, and welcome to Practice Growth HQ. Now, today we're going to talk about something that's going to be fun. Data to dollars. Who doesn't like the sound of that? Turning numbers into growth with my guest, Jason Brylle. So Jason is the founder of Parable Associates, and hopefully he's got a few good stories for us. That's what a parable is, ladies and gentlemen. A healthcare data analytics firm specializing in revenue cycle management, business intelligence for specialty medical practice, which is the listeners of Practice Growth HQ. He's got more than a decade in this space. He's helped practice behavioral health, dermatology, dentistry, orthopedics, and turning complex data, which some of us would, our eyes would glaze over, into actionable insights, which is something that we all want. Jason is from rural southwest Michigan, a town called Three Rivers. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks, Angus. Nice to meet you and great to be part of the podcast. Really excited for the conversation.
Absolutely. Jason, we like to start with the fast five, kind of quicker questions and quicker answers so people can get to know you quickly. Question one, where did you grow up?
So I grew up in a town called Grand Blanc, Michigan in the US, just outside of Flint, Michigan.
Okay, so it sounds like, have you always lived in that area?
No, I've been all over the country. So after I graduated from college, I moved to Little Rock, Arkansas, Tucson, Arizona, Greenville, South Carolina, and New Jersey. And I've been a traveling consultant. So I've seen pretty much the entirety of the US, flying around and going to different clients all over the place.
Good for you. Good for you. It is, I do find it interesting that a lot of people through direct means or happenstance gravitate to back to where they came from. I lived in Adelaide at one point and I noticed a lot of people, they would grow up there and then they'd go off to university and they'd go and work somewhere for a while and then they'd kind of come back home. All right, question two, Jason, favorite book besides your own?
Well, that's a great one. I read a lot, so many of them. This one's called Start at the End by Dave Levinsky. I think if you're a practice owner, management, any entrepreneur for that matter, it's a great book to say, let's start at the end and work our way backwards to figure out what kind of a business or practice do you want to build. So it's a great book, general business, not just healthcare practice, but I got a list. That could have been your top five and I could have gone all day.
Yes, you're a kindred spirit in that regard, Jason. Start at the end. Well, I think it's something I wonder, listeners, if you've given any thought to what the end is. All right, question three. What's one of your superpowers?
Well, it's right along with the title or the theme. So, being able to turn data into insights, which I didn't think was a superpower until I got into consulting and merely looking at a spreadsheet could find insights or ask the next question deeper. So, that's definitely the superpower I have.
All right, well, that's good for the business you've got too. All right, question four. Something you wish your 20-year-old self knew.
When I was 20, I thought I had to get a 4-year degree from my college, which I went to Michigan State, get a 4-year degree and go work for a Fortune 500 company in order to make it in this world. I wish that I had known how much opportunity there is in small business and small community businesses. And that's really how I've kind of led more my business is helping practices of various sizes, but ultimately trying to help them grow and expand within the communities that they serve. I wish I had known how much opportunity was in small business when I kind of was targeting only the big fish. You know what I mean? Just a
Oh,
different perspective as an adult.
oh, well, the listeners are pleased to hear that because that's effectively what we have on this podcast. The listeners is a whole bunch
Good.
of small business owners. I mean, some of our listeners have got multiple practices, but they're not big corporations. Finally, question five, something you're grateful for.
I am grateful for the team that I have. And I know that's a little cliche, but when you're an entrepreneur, when you're a founder, when you're running a practice, I used to say I convinced people to work for me. And now people like we look at how many resumes come through when we open a job posting, and it's just unbelievable. Hundreds and hundreds of resumes are coming through. It's humbling to know that we've built something that speaks to individuals that want to come work for an organization that believe in the mission, the values, and what we're building. It's absolutely humbling, and I appreciate that everybody has been with me as long as they have. I don't take it for granted.
That's great. Look, it might surprise you, Jason, but on Practice Growth HQ, what you said, that's not a cliche at all. I'm not saying that nobody before you has mentioned their team, but family gets a very good run for that question. It's nice to hear about the team as well. All right, well, let's get to our topic for today, data to dollars. Look, all of us want that, but I dare say there's a number of us listening to this going, I love that outcome, but shoot me now. I don't want to have to look at the numbers, or it's overwhelming, or I don't know where to start. Why don't we do this? Give us the case for it. Can you give the listeners two or three examples where you'd go, so here was the practice, we looked at the data, we discovered a big gaping hole, we filled that hole, and this was the result. Just give us a few success stories before we get into the details.
So I'll one that's more general, and then I'll get to one that's really specific. So in a more general sense, there's some practices that we go to that are eager to grow and scale. Some of them have a privately owned group, maybe it's like 10 providers, but they have aspirations to get to 20 or 30 or 40 and like really grow and make an impact. Not to say they aren't right now, but they really want to grow. But what's holding them back? They're limited from the dashboards they have within their host system, their practice management software, their call center data. They don't have an analyst to actively look and comb through numbers. And so we've worked with organizations that are of that size and then simply just creating a culture where they're saying, okay, every Monday, here's the dashboard that you should look at. Here's the financial metrics that are in it. Every day of the week, here's your daily huddle and what you're looking for with the patients coming in. And I'm here in the States where you're looking at copays and things like that that are coming in that are due or prior balances. So there's a whole multitude of things you can look at, but having a cadence to it and building a culture tends to be that catalyst that says, okay, now that we have that culture, now we're having these insights, now we're motivated as employees within our practice because I have clear targets and numbers, which I've aligned with data visualizations or charts and graphs. So now I'm aligned as an employee. I'm more productive. Therefore, there's financial motivations for the practice. Now they're growing and expanding. They're able to add on that next provider. So we've seen that play out countless times.
Listeners, it's like you driving a car where maybe you don't have a very good steering wheel. Maybe it's a stick that you've got to use to steer your car. And by the way, you don't have a speedometer. And by the way, you don't have a tachometer, the thing that, shows you how fast the engine's running. And by the way, you don't have a GPS and you don't have indicators. And that's the kind of analogy. It's like, have you ever seen those films with aeroplanes, those bi-wing, tri-wings? They've got this kind of throttle and it kind of gets the, airplane heading in a forward motion, but the control is terrible. Where if you contrast that with a car now that's got GPS and cruise control and it keeps you in the lane and you don't hit the car in front of you and all that stuff, like that's the kind of conceptual difference between the two. Let's get specific now, Jason.
And I love that analogy, by the way, because even without the dashboard, the driver can still drive the vehicle and you can do a lot of it by gut feel. But if you have the indicators in front of you, you could be much more effective at your speed planning for a tight turn, right? Have the information in front of you. So it's not to say you can't lead a successful practice without data and analytics, but boy, it makes it a lot easier. So in a specific example, there's a client that we had recently that, again, they're in growth and expansion mode, private practice, but a decently large group, I think around 30 providers or so. And they were able to take a look at dashboards we built specific to scheduling. So we could see how many days out each provider was booked. And then we could look at the patients that are trying to come in that are in some sort of a wait list or they're booked far out. What are they coming in for? And they were able to add providers through this growth and expansion. They had 3 brand new providers and they filled their schedule entirely within the first 30 days. So bringing new patients to these new providers, never been part of the practice, immediately turning those new providers into ROI positive, right?
Okay.
Which was, it's an investment when we're growing a practice. We call that third next available and looking for the third next available slot for a certain visit type that's coming in. And so how far out are we booking? And if it's way far out in the future, then there's an opportunity to start pulling some of those forward if you're adding providers and things like that. So just one hyper-specific way of using data.
Okay. In one of my businesses, I've got my son doing it for a living. He works for a company that they're in retail and they provide what they call fast moving consumer goods to grocery in Australia. So I won't say the name of the company, but rest assured, listeners, if I mention it to you, I don't think there'd be a single person on listening to this who wouldn't have heard of it before. And this is millions and millions of dollars through the big supermarkets in Australia. And he went to them and then started building dashboards because you'd be amazed when you've got a company that's doing 50 or $100 million a year, there are holes all the time, like our big supermarkets in Australia, Coles and Woolworths, it'd be like, oh, we need 100 pallets of this product. And many occasions, because of getting production working, etc., they would go, oh, no, sorry, can't provide that. And literally as a result of this analytics, he's put millions of dollars extra into the company by sort of forecasting and saying, well, look, we can't do that, but we can do this. That's out of the realms of most of the listeners to this podcast. But for us, you've got to get some benefits of being a parent, Jason. And it's like, come
Yeah.
on, let's get a dashboard for our business to look at things like the utilization of staff, the retention of staff, the retention of
Yeah.
clients, et cetera, et cetera. Because, yeah, our cadence is we look at that every week. Every Monday, we'll look at that. That data is updated. As we've given the analogy, it's like driving a vehicle where you've got all of the tools to help you the fastest route possible to the destination. So now that we've established that kind of the case for data to dollars, what do you need to do practically?
Well, some of it depends on the size of your org and some of it depends on the host systems that you use. Let's start at kind of the base level and say you're a single doc practice.
Yeah.
And in that setting, chances are you're actually fine with what's in the host system itself. It comes more down to scheduling what reports to look at and the frequency that you need to look at them and committing to it. So set a subscription or set a schedule, actually commit to looking at those things. As far as which KPIs or key performance indicators that you need to be focused in on, I can recommend a couple, which I'll do right now, but I'll also tell you, you can find a lot of things online now with all these AI tools. So don't be shy of going to a chat GPT or go to my website and look at our blogs. We post
Okay.
them all the time before the GPTs were out there. But go and ask what are the top KPIs I should look at if I'm a dental practice or ophthalmology or optometry or whatever it is you are. But I always tell people I have a lot of rev cycle in my background, a lot of the financial reporting and analytics in my wheelhouse. We also do clinical and operational, but I want to know my DSO or day sales outstanding, which tells me on average how fast do I get paid. So my accounts receivable, my
Okay.
average revenue from the past 90 days. So how fast am I getting paid? How much is that coming in the door? I want to know my third next available. So I want to know how many days out I'm booked for certain appointment types. So if you have like any of your, let's just say it's a routine cleaning in the dental space. So how far out, if a new patient calls in today, what is the third next available? So your next available in your schedule might be a false positive because you had a same day cancellation.
Right.
Your second, same or similar situation. So it tries to remove the errors from it and saying, what is the next date if I tried to get somebody brand new in here into my practice? And that's a measure of kind of like your backlog of services, but it's also a patient satisfier, especially from a marketing side. If you got a whole lot of leads coming in, they're interested in seeing you as a provider, you want to make sure that you have a capacity somewhere on the schedule for them. And I've found that working with some specialties here in the States, some of them have a very long backlog. And so that third next available is 30, even 60 days out before a patient can be seen. And if you are interested in growth of your practice, if you're interested in taking on new patients, there may be a competitor down the street who has more capacity open who's going to swipe in and take that patient from you. But if you're interested in doing that for those growth minded practices.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one. Two comments. One is it's quite possible, in fact, this is really common, in the same practice to have multiple practitioners, and typically one is the founder, the practice principal, and their third next available, their one might be 3 months away, but they might have an associate working for them where the third next available is next week. So that's not uncommon. And the other thing, one of the real challenges in business, listeners, is how dynamic this is. Because here's the irony, it's like, hey, let's grow really fast and fill up all our space so that we can be really responsive to our patients. And then you succeed. And then suddenly
Mhm.
it's like the very reasons that you are growing because you have these available appointments, suddenly they're not there because your books are full. It can be super dynamic and it can be even sort of month to month. Something happens, everybody's on holidays or whatever, and that third next available. I think that's a very interesting measure. Keep going, Jason.
Net Promoter Score, which everybody's right now using Yelps and Google and all their websites to give you stars and rankings. So you got to keep your finger on the pulse of keeping a happy patient community and listen to those patients as well.
How do you calculate net promoter score?
What we do is there's different applications that have surveys that essentially calculate it for you. And so there's some even PMs and EMRs, practice management software and medical record software. Some of them have them built in. So you have that workflow, and then we take that survey response and calculate it that way. You can also get data from, like I said, Google and those types of reviews. It just means how many positive reviews. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how many positive reviews did you have? And so again, on Google, you want to be in that 4.6 to 5.0 on that scale, on that gradient there. But then again, there's different systems that'll do surveys for patients as well. So at the point of checkout, they get a immediate survey response as a text or an email. And for those that fill it out, not every patient will, but it gives you an opportunity to get that feedback loop.
Yeah, that is very important. The Net Promoter Score, interestingly, if I remember rightly, if somebody rates you a 6 or a 7 out of 10, it means they're at risk. If they're a 10 out of 10, a 9 out of 10, I think 8 is included on the positive side. Basically,
Yep.
what it does, that particular measure says for if you get a, I know Jason's just mentioned 5 stars for Google, but you can ask people to rate you out of 10. If someone gives you an 8, 9, or 10, that's on the positive side. If they give you a 5 through 1, that's on the negative side. And as the name says, the net promoter score is you deduct one number from the other and you get a sense of where you're at. So curiously, that particular thing there says if someone rates you a 6 or a 7, it's not even counted. So those people who are kind of giving you a B or a C, like at school, that's actually bad news. It's not, I mean, some of them may keep coming, but their commitment to you is pretty low.
I think it's promoters, passives, and detractors are the categories, and detractors are 6 and below. So you obviously want the 9s and the 10s, but you're right. And then I would say you also want to take a look at internally, again, if you're growing and transforming as a practice, but you want to look at your employee turnover rate. So you want to keep that to 0. Obviously, you don't want any turnover if you have great employees. Because again, you're thinking about, I always think about if I'm growing a practice, I want consistency in the deliverables. One of the other books back here is all about scalability and having consistent workflows. And I've noticed as a business founder myself, that is absolutely one of the most critical things to growing a business is having a consistent expectation for your clients, for your patients to come into. So from an HR side, also look internally. Don't just look at the financial metrics. Don't just look at like the patient net promoter score, but also you as a founder should be looking at your employees as part of your customers that you have to satisfy to retain and keep them around.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? The old internal customer. So how do we keep a grasp on how happy the staff are? I mean, are we doing it by gut feel? Like, what can we do?
Well, I'll tell you what we do internally, and this isn't even necessarily just what we do for clients. Some have things they do already, but we have an employee survey that gets sent out every single month. It's meant to be a really easy survey to complete, really time sensitive, but ask questions in that survey. Well, one, make sure that you are doing something consistently on a cadence. But in that survey, ask questions like, would you refer a friend to come work here? Right. So if you ask, do you love working here? It's more likely to skew towards, of course I do, because I'm
Yeah.
submitting a survey and you're going to read it. But if you really start thinking about the questions and how you word them, the results may change. So would you have somebody that you are friendly with apply to a position here? And that'll give you some feedback.
Jason, one of the challenges with a survey is you can create an expectation. I will admit in my organization, so it's called Friday feedback. And so we get everybody to fill in a survey on Friday. And it's mainly self-reflection, but it also allows people to identify in a survey. I think the last question of the survey is traffic lights. And it's kind of, how are you feeling at the moment? And green is like everything's great, and amber is things are okay, and red is things are not okay, and I need to talk. And yeah, it's a tricky one. We just need to keep reinforcing to the team. We need you to fill that in. It's largely self-reflection, but we're going to keep an eye on it as well. We do a monthly survey, which probably goes a little bit deeper, and that's more of those questions around would you refer a friend, etc. And then from a past guest on Practice Growth HQ, we've started doing a quarterly one, which is based on, I believe the company's called Great Place to Work, and you can be assessed, get your company assessed. And they have a 3-question survey. Question 1, name, optional. Question 2, what do you appreciate about this workplace? Question 3, what would you change? In fact, I'm about to do that in 2 weeks' time. We've already started surveying the team. And that's for your management team to look at the answers to what would they change and go through them one by one. You'll certainly get some good feedback that way. Maybe not feedback you want to hear, but I always take the view, if people have got an opinion anyway, I guess I'd rather know than not in that instance.
And you have to do something with the data too, otherwise people stop filling them out. And we've been through that cycle as a business, so I can certainly attest to you start garnering the most feedback when you're actually making business decisions or communicating why or why not, but at least acknowledge that you're reading through them and strongly considering whatever the feedback is. But yeah, that employee loop is a really important one. I think people always look externally. How do I grow my business externally? How do I get more patients in the door? What services can I offer that I'm not offering today? But take a minute to actually get the temperature check of the internal team as well.
Yes, it's very important. I've heard it said how you treat your employees is how they treat your clients.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it's one you've got to be very careful about. And as you are growing, then what's happening is you're getting further and further away from the client in many cases. Most of our listeners are practice owners. And so they are clinicians, which is good, but more and more of the business is starting to happen in a sense without your direct knowledge. That's just the reality. You can't grow bigger with you knowing everything that's going on. And so staying close to the client and close to their staff is really important. All right, there's a fair bit there, Jason. I just wondered for someone who's not doing anything, let's start there. Okay, boys, you've convinced me. I can see I like your analogy of the biplane or the triplane flying through the fields, but not really going very
Yeah.
direct versus a modern vehicle. Where should they start?
Well, start with a moment of reflection on. So, what I always recommend is a pyramid approach. So, start with the executive team. What's the mission of the business? What's the goal or objective that you want to achieve this, let's say, year? We always think about like in the year of 2025, you could go even more tight than that, right? Like, I often recommend saying, like, hey, what do we want to do this quarter? But let's just say year, big picture items. If it's growth, within your community, get more patient population in there, if it's grow financially, if it's just optimize clinical care. And it's like, I don't necessarily want to prioritize that, but I want to make sure that, well, I was providing services during COVID, and I know in urgent care, especially, we wanted to make sure that everybody was getting their COVID tests and getting Paxlovid and all these other things going on within the community. So we were looking at orders for prescriptions and things like that. And so that became the priority. So start with whatever that priority is. And then you need to set a KPI to measure it against, right? And then underneath that, recognize that everybody in your organization has to be on the same page. Therefore, they need a metric to align with whatever that vision or that goal is.
I don't know, let's say they've got a three practitioner practice. So we'll call it, it's not single, but it's not dozens. And they say, we want to grow revenue this quarter by 10%. All right. So there's the mission. It's very clear. And I would say with these missions, your goals, you want to make it in such a way that someone who knows nothing about your business looking over your shoulder can say, did you achieve that? Yes or no? If it's vague, we want to quote unquote get better at dot dot dot, then it's like that quote from Alice in Wonderland, like, where do you want to go? I don't know. Well, then anyway's going to take you there. It's like you've got to be really
Yeah.
specific. So we want to grow by 10% this quarter. All right, good. So that's the top line goal. How do we
Yep.
get that goal to permeate down to each person so they've got their KPI?
So, in order to achieve that goal, to achieve that type of growth, you got to look again. We can look at the schedules. Is every provider busy? And if let's just assume everybody is busy, there isn't any opportunity to move more patients around. It is what it is. Then you got to look at the type of services that you're currently offering. Are there high dollar services that are going underutilized? Is there a legitimate reason for that? So, another one that we often work on with our customers is surgery conversion rates. So if people are going in for some sort of, screening of some sort, do you actually convert them into a recommendation or a diagnosis that says you actually need a procedure? And then do they do that procedure with you, or do they go externally for it? So you got to monitor those orders and those referrals that are going out if they're leaving your practice.
Well, I mean, Cheryl, the receptionist, what's her
Mhm.
KPI if we're trying to boost revenue by 10%?
Well, if you're trying to boost revenue by 10%, with her, I would probably look at something around. I'm basing this off the US where we have these copays and deductibles and so on. But if you're growing the revenue, you want to make sure that you have the cash flow to support it. So that's one is point of service collections, and that you're clearing those patients on the front end, that you're reducing denials, because it may be if you're trying to grow that 10% and you're doing it through volume, we have authorizations that are required for
Mm.
services. So you want to make sure that whatever's within their job function, that you're actually able to capitalize on that revenue growth, that you're actually getting collections for that. And so you'd look at denial rates for authorizations, you look at copay collection rates. Those are the things that'll directly impact that financial incentive that you're doing.
Fortunately, that's much less of an issue in Australia. I've just come from the US last week and was at a conference there and was listening to people talk about that. Yes, if I can say this with respect, insurance in the US is a nightmare. And I'd say in Australia, it's a much more simple equation. Most practices have got something called high caps, and the copay, the gap as we call it, it's figured out instantly. So it's very rare that you're having to wait to receive those payments in most cases, which is good. All right, so thankfully we don't have to worry about that for Cheryl. Look, I would say for her, I'd be looking at some KPIs around unanswered calls.
Mm.
Very simple metric, but oh gosh, it's shocking how often practices don't answer the phone. I was talking to someone at the conference and she said she was working with a practice once and the guys were like, oh, that's fine. Look, the answering machine will get it and we'll get back to them. Well, I can tell you in 2025, like that's a recipe for not growing your business. There are certain people that are looking at your name on a list of other suitable practitioners, and if you don't answer, they're on to the next one. So it could be, I would say the other KPI for Cheryl would be what we'll call appointment conversion, which is for every 10 people who call up inquiring about, oh, do you do XYZ service? What percentage of them actually book in? Depends a bit on the business. Certainly in
Yeah.
medical in Australia, I was talking to a doctor's practice recently. They said, oh, that's pretty much a non-issue unless there are no appointments available. But certainly for dental, physio, chiropractic, etc., that conversion rate can be anywhere from 30 to 40% to 90%. So it can make a massive difference.
I was recently at a conference where there was a demonstration of an AI agent that was answering phone calls. So it'd first go to the human, but if Cheryl in the example did not pick up the phone, it would actually go to an agent that would attempt to book that visit for that patient.
Yes, there are a few people demonstrating those. Look, I chatted to someone about this and they said, I don't know how to describe it. It's a little bit like a robot in the sense of you're a robot on a factory and you got one job, which is you can help people book an appointment or not. That's what they said where it's at. But if it's any more nuanced about the procedures, etc., then that's where we need to get Cheryl back on the phone. So yes, there can be some help from technology for sure. All right, Jason. Well, as we start to wrap up, just give us some concluding thoughts about data to dollars.
We talked a lot about where to start and having consistency in your practice, but as you progress through, I would also just acknowledge that you don't have to be an incredibly large enterprise organization to start using tools like business intelligence, really sophisticated Excel sheets even before that. But there are business intelligence tools that you could buy for $20 per user per month type of range, and they're incredibly powerful in taking millions of records. So don't think you're not big enough, right? Don't think I can't afford to build that infrastructure out or start in its infancy, because those tools also have those subscriptions. They have the ability to handle more than a million records, like Excel has that limitation. If I was to give myself advice again at 20, I thought I had to go to the Fortune 500 to do really meaningful stuff in this world. The reality is these tools are now accessible to even single doc practices. There's tons of options to listen to people like myself and get advice on how to start up, or even go to YouTube. The friction of not having data is no longer an excuse.
Right.
There's a cost to not knowing. There's a cost to not having that dashboard in front of you. It's lost opportunity. I
Absolutely.
highly recommend people look at solutions for it. Yeah.
All right, Jason, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. If people want to get in touch or learn more, what should they do?
The best place to follow myself right now is on LinkedIn. So look for Jason Brylle, Bryll on LinkedIn. I'm going to be posting a lot more there. And our website is www.parableassociates.com, Parable, parableassociates.com. And if you send in the contact info, it goes right to me. So we get a chance to talk one-on-one.
Fantastic. All right, thanks again, Jason. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks, Angus. Appreciate the opportunity.
All right, everyone. Well, we've covered a bit there. Look, I'm aware some of you are not into data. That's fine. But come on, guys. This is 2025. Data to dollars. It doesn't need to be difficult. As Jason said, don't assume that just because you're small, you can't be looking at this stuff. Even if you just grab hold of 2 or 3 metrics and start looking at those on a regular basis, it'll take the fear out of it, and you can get yourself out of a biplane that's kind of flopping over the fields in a very efficient manner, rather than a car that is A to Z. Finally, if you got some value from our time together, then I'd really appreciate if you'd head to where you heard this show, leave us a lovely review to give us the encouragement to bring you more great content every week on Practice Growth HQ.